Welcome to Transformational Blueprints, the podcast that's here to tackle the big question. Why do so many transformation programs fall short, and what can we do about it? I'm Mario Michaels, founder and director of Synaxia Group, and I'm thrilled to have you join me. In this series, we go beyond theory, bringing you first-hand stories and insights from some of the world's top architecture and transformation leaders. It's all about sharing real-world lessons, sparking fresh ideas, and giving back to the architecture community. So whether you're looking to learn, be inspired, or stay ahead of the curve, grab your coffee, settle in, and let's dive in together. Welcome everybody. Today we're going to be talking to Jon Durant about humans and at the heart of enterprise architecture. Over 20 years of experience in public and private sector working predominantly in finance, publishing, and more recently education, plus brief forays into telecoms and aerospace, Jon is a credible architecture leader. Starting out as a graduate software engineer, he quickly became interested in how the whole enterprise worked and how technology could serve organizations better. And that led him to focus on enterprise architecture, people, process, and technology, which is essentially the topic of today's conversation. He has built and led architecture teams to deliver and define realistic technology strategies that bring about digital transformation. This includes modernizing legacy systems, rationalizing complex, sprawling, disparate systems and estates, but always with a focus on the fact that it's people that deliver and are impacted by the changes. So Jon, welcome to the podcast.
Morning. Well, great to be with you, Mario, and thanks for having me along.
No problem. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are. And I briefly sort of touched on that in the intro.
As you say in the intro, I was fortunate to start out as a graduate software engineer and learnt my trade in the engineering world, testing and writing code, but quickly kind of really wanted to understand what that was doing, what that was delivering for the organization, for the users, be they customers or internal staff users of any system. And the interesting bit, and I say the broad topic of today is really around, the fact that people are what you deliver for. Even with AI, it's the thing about we've just had different jobs and different ways of doing things. But what I really interested in quickly was, how the process and the people engaged, connected with technology, handed off between teams and did stuff. I was fortunate to spend many years in the finance sector, doing lots of things, predominantly working on site as a consultant at Nationwide in Swindon. And after that, I've moved into publishing. So sort of always digital services, online systems, online services. And as you touched on the intro, more recently, I've been at UCAS, helping them organize their systems and continue to deliver on the really big events that form UCAS's main events in August when we run the confirmation and clearing process. So it's been a broad career and I've really enjoyed it, but people is what excites me. The architecture nuts and bolts are important, don't get me wrong, absolutely important, but it's the people side of stuff and working with lots of different people, lots of different personalities and skills, and really engaging to find out how we can, as technologists, deliver better.
Okay. And for those that are either based outside of the UK or that are in the UK and don't know what UCAS or who UCAS are, would you mind just giving us a bit of an overview of them? Because I think if you don't have kids that have gone to university, you probably have no idea who they are.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, if you've applied to higher education, university in the UK, you will know who UCAS is in some way or form or other. But UCAS is the Universities and Colleges Admissions Service in the UK. It fundamentally serves nearly 400 universities and colleges across 40,000 courses available through UCAS that we support the admissions process for. The bigger numbers are that there's 750,000 students apply to us every year, and last year 550,000 of those secured a place at a university on a full-time course. So those are big numbers, and UCAS is somewhat measured by the success or not of a single day in August. It's usually the second Thursday, not forgetting that Scotland is a week earlier, but England, Wales and Northern Ireland is the sort of big event in August that everyone will be familiar with, of getting their A-level results and understanding whether or not they've got that secured that place at university. But we do much more than that. We've got a commercial subsidiary which allows us to provide services and marketing services to associated facilities for students for that market, so banking, accommodation, student lifestyle, as well as to the providers of courses to help them ensure they get the best possible students and candidates and applicants attending their course to get the best outcome. So it really is a year-round organisation, and the academic year cycle runs all year, but everyone knows about us for a day in August and then it all goes quiet.
And that's why I'm looking forward to this conversation, because the risk element of that particular day and the reputational damage that could be caused if it doesn't go right, but also, the good reputation if it does go right, is absolutely imperative. So it's like having a project deadline every single year to hit, and it's got to go well. It's not like you can, hide it from the board or tell people what you want them to hear. This is in the public domain. Everybody knows about all the data, statistics, and if it goes wrong, my God, the Daily Mail will have a field trip, won't it? So
indeed, the press and the media are usually pretty on topic on that day on what's going on, and we quite often, a number of members of staff front up at various media establishments, including the BBC and the infamous red sofas. But it is sort of boom bust, success or failure is measured by that day. But it's a well-oiled machine, despite some of the mechanics which we'll talk a little bit about, but obviously maintain the confidentiality to a certain extent. But it's a well-oiled machine that ensures that day is as successful as possible.
Okay, so in series 2 of this podcast, we've started a new trend, which is get a question from the previous guest. So your question is, what do you believe would be the role of an architect with the advent of AI?
And that's a really good question, and I think it's very pertinent for the topic of today's real sort of chat, really, which is to be an interpreter, to be the human at the heart, because architects, in my view, live in the grey. We have to establish if something's black or white. That's generally it. We have to deal with ambiguity, and at the moment we're dealing with a lot of ambiguity. Is it real? Is it AI? Is the AI right? Is it biased? Is it ethical? Is it trying to be too friendly? I mean, we've recently seen the backing out some changes to some of the AI because it was being trying to be too polite, and there's a conversation about should you say please and thank you to AI? Does it really make a difference? But I think as an architect we can be that critical friend. We can say here's the right place to use AI, and here's perhaps not quite the right place to use AI in the form it's available in at the moment, and that will continue to evolve. And architects really should be that voice of both innovation but also pragmatism and realism of this is perhaps not the right application, whereas that one might be. So I think that's trusted advisor to the C-suite, the heads of service, and even staff all the way up and down, to help them understand where and when we should and shouldn't be using AI.
So it leads me nicely on to the next question, and around this is probably more around skills or traits. What do you think makes a great architect in today's world? You touched on being a trusted advisor, but I suppose when you're hiring one or when you're building a team, what do you look for then to become that trusted advisor?
Yeah, so key thing really is personal, the soft skills. It's the being able to listen to the question, listen to what you're being told, listen to what you're hearing from the people you've asked the questions of, but fundamentally also be able to challenge it in a tactful and respectful way. Why, the 5 whys, or the why, where, how, what, when kind of question tactics. to really dig into the need and the rationale behind the ask. If it's so often organizations present solutions rather than the root cause problems. It's classic kind of technology challenge, isn't it? But really have those interpersonal skills to build relationships. I don't mind if you're an extrovert or an introvert, you can. That's more about how comfortable you are doing it in a big group versus doing it on a one-to-one basis. But being able to gain command and have the respect of the people, the stakeholders you've got to work with, in a way that allows you to then potentially have some difficult conversations and challenge them back as to the need.
How do you assess that interview?
That's a good question. Generally, I ask people to challenge me. I say, to tell me about the time you've had to have a difficult conversation. That's a classic one. But also, pretend I'm a CTO and I've asked you to do this. Do you think it's right or wrong? What questions would you ask me? And just see how they go. Because if they're if they're an experienced in it architect, they will have a couple of questions that they will start to sort of probe and dig into. If they're a little bit greener, new to the field, then they perhaps need a little bit more mentoring and coaching just to help guide them in that sort of navigating that questioning route.
Okay, fair enough. So we're going to talk about legacy transformations, and because everybody's on them at the moment, part of a digital transformation program, unless you are a startup or a scale up, as a head of EA or a head of architecture or chief architect, the chances are you've inherited some form of spaghetti, and they are hard and they're often tightly coupled and messy. So how do you approach picking them apart without creating even more risk?
So you use a good word there, spaghetti. It is, as you say, there's always some spaghetti, and if it's a particularly sort of messy or legacy system, you may not have all the documentation, or it may be in someone's head. So the key approach I've used here is really just to understand the key purpose of the system, understand the key components. You've got to kind of start at the top down and work down into functional decomposition, break it apart into smaller pieces is where you want to get to. How small do you need to go? Well, you don't know where you'll end up. You're not, you might have a monolith, and microservices is the answer, but how granular are those microservices is the key thing. But you find that out in the journey along the way. You'll have a few good ideas as an architect. You'll have seen stuff. Payments is usually a key thing that you can put in a box and interface with. But the other thing to pick out is, where are the key interfaces? Where's the key data exchange points? So a couple of your other guests have talked about data and that quite heavily, so I won't go on about that. But where does data move around? How does data exchange, and where are the interfaces? Because those are the areas you've got to exercise the most got to be really careful around those areas to ensure that you manage the risk, because if you break that, there's probably the law of unintended consequences will cascade and compound on you. So you start at the top and go, right, we've got a system. It takes this data in and that data comes out, and it does a few things in the middle, a lot of things in the middle, and you just really kind of just pick it apart. If you can then draw a box around it and you can define those interfaces, if you haven't got all the documentation, then you really do need, that's a good start. You've got a box, you've got something in it, it has a purpose and it performs a task, and it's a bit smaller than the one you started with, and you just keep going. To use the agile terminology, you just iterate. But it's not always in a particularly rapid way. At UCAS we were quite constrained by how you delivered the changes as according to the academic cycle, but within that, it's really, you can use a number of patterns. Most architects probably heard of Martin Fowler, and many good patterns and kind of ideas and thoughts on his website. If you haven't, you look him up. I'd strongly advise that. But constraining the boundary of where you're looking and understanding the interface and the data that it exchanges to make the problem smaller. I like the idea of spaghetti. The other analogy I use is Kaplunk, for those of you who are familiar with the old style game. Effectively is a pile of sticks, and you have to pull them out without the rest of the pile falling over. And that is really what you're trying to achieve with a legacy system.
And I think a lot of leaders fall into, especially within architecture, fall into the trap of, we're doing this digital transformation, it needs to be massive, this is where we're going to get to, this is the end goal. And ultimately, that's probably one of the reasons why the statistics around failure of digital transformations is so high, because it changes as you go along. And if you're trying to do this big bang digital transformation program in one go, then the chances are it is going to fail. So it is about dismantling those legacy systems, as you say, like Kaplank, slowly, safely, and incrementally, rather than that big bang transformation. But I suppose you've not predominantly, but more recently worked in a couple of public sector organizations where budgets are tight. We all know that, right? It's well documented. So how do organizations like that are, number one, under the microscope of the media and waiting, it's like, I bet you felt like the media were waiting for you to fail, so they got a story, but also with the tight budgets, you're in the public eye, your employees are probably in the team are probably being paid less than they would do in the private sector, so there's this argument around, right, you need to be getting someone else, and we'll come on to the human side in a minute, but I suppose, how do you go about doing that transformation program?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the key thing, we touched on it in the previous question there, is start small, build trust, have a bit of success, and be honest when it isn't working, manage, use all the classic risk management approaches, RAID logs and all the rest of it, just to understand the mitigations. Should we score it so where and when you shouldn't be doing it? Is it a time-based boundary that you've got to worry about? As you say, don't do it a day before. It's always a good thing. But start small, build trust. The key thing for me is really about always having a working system. So if you've always got a working system and you've got limited budget, it forces you to be efficient with that money. It forces you to spend it wisely. Not to say that private sector can frivolous, but they certainly have a little more latitude and can often buy their way out of a problem. You can't necessarily do that in charities and public sector per se. But if you start small, if you build success, if you have moderate ambitions rather than lofty ones of it's got to be big and it's got to be dynamic and it's got to be kind of well kind of delivered overall. You're just pushing a large rock up a very steep hill, to misquote the myths and stuff there. But if you start small and you build trust, and if you keep the system working as you go, that enables you to sort of progressively release either small bits of budget year on year or throughout the year, and do a little bit more and do a little bit more, and then you pick away at the legacy problem. We've pulled apart a number of systems. We've made a number of changes at UCAS, and I did the same at Oxford University Press where I was there, where we effectively said that's a nice, well-bounded problem. We will tackle that next, and this is broadly what it set out to do with its goals and outcomes that we wanted to achieve, and they're realistic rather than lofty and a little bit too ambitious for the sake of looking good on paper and stuff. But you do have to then say, you get the challenge back from the board. Is this enough? And I'm like, it's enough for now. There's more to come. But it also avoids this is 10, 15, 20 million pound 3-year project kind of
discussion. Okay. And that stakeholder buying is huge. And more often than not, people within the leadership team leave within a transformation program along the journey. How do you maintain that continuity of leadership and stakeholder buy-in across those long, complex transformation programs?
Yeah, and this is a really hard thing to do in many organizations, because, as you say, the staff rotation, staff churn for whatever the cause and the reason, people have careers and move around, is really, really hard. It either requires a couple of individuals with stamina and a long staying power to sort of see it through. And at both my previous organizations, I've set something in train and seen the majority of it through, not all the way to the end, but it's met a milestone. So you can take that on as an individual and sort of be the catalyst, the linchpin that sort of holds it all together. But as you say, the stakeholder management side of it, there's always a bit of change. There's always changing priorities and changing focus. So I think the key thing is really having a clear strategy, clear goals and outcomes that are written down and really well articulated, that are then embedded in the organizational mindset of why a particular project or particular transformation is happening. It's the human side. You have to remember why you're doing it. And in a mission-led organization, in charity, it's really, why are we doing it? Grant access people, help people with access to higher education. That is UCAS's mission in a nutshell. It's the more pithy version. But why do we do it? This is, the project, we want to transform this because this bit of the system is holding us back. We can't be flexible. We can't do X, Y, Z with that thing working that way. So we've got to transform it. And you really embed it in the team, in the culture, and make sure it's reinforced on regular basis, so that if you win the lottery, to use the more positive proverbial experience rather than the bus one, and somebody moves on, you don't lose all of the impetus, all of the knowledge, all of the groundswell of goodwill and momentum behind a project.
And I suppose, how do you succession plan that? Because you're right, people do move on because of career, and that stakeholder buy-in is great from that level, but I suppose extracting key things from key people, or everybody really, because everybody's a key person on a transformation program, otherwise they wouldn't be there. How do you succession plan just in case somebody does leave?
So I think key thing for me is making sure that everyone knows why they're there and what they are contributing. So it's whether you call it a hive mind or a collective mindset, I don't really mind, but it's they have responsibilities, they know what their accountabilities are, but to use the agile term, again, it's, if they need to swarm and get around a problem, they will tackle and tackle a problem together collectively, but they respect each other's professional kind of expertise and skills. But I've always worked on the principle that the people who know the systems best are the ones closest to them, or people, the ones who are taking the calls from customers know the customer problems far better than those that have reached the lofty heights of the C-suite and stuff. Myself includes, the head of service. We all get on the phones at UCAS. It's brilliant because it brings you back to ground. It really does. But it's to plan for the succession. It's really ensuring that individuals know what they're doing, that you've got the breadth of a team, and hopefully you're in the fortunate position where you've got a team of more than one or two, so you've got a bit of air cover from other individuals, that they can pick stuff up if they need to from others. So the shared responsibility, the shared accountability of why this project's happening, why this particular phase or stage, if it is a multi-year program, is happening, is shared. And the individuals are contributing either because they've got expertise about the system, about the customer need, or they are the sort of designer, architect, pulling the integrations together and understanding how to do that, and ensuring that that's spread about a little bit gives you that hair cover, but also within your functional disciplines, crossing over the teams and making sure. And one thing I've always done with my teams is make sure that they have an active area of responsibility, but they're also a shadow for someone else. So they've got a bit of, and there's a degree of, well, the business needs you to do this, but also if you're particularly interested in that area, so I can help nurture and develop individuals as well. So it's sort of it's a balancing act, but often
it's a great strategy that actually, let's not call it a strategy, but it's good for everyone, especially if they have that interest in that area of the thing. Going back a step, the most important thing is making sure you've got the right team, right? And the right people in the right seat. So how do you identify whether you have the right team in place at the start of a transformation program?
Yeah. So I think it comes back to the sort of soft skills we talked about, the interviewing and recruiting side of it, and then look at what do I look for in people. But if somebody is an expert, whether they are, quietly getting on with a job and sort of flying under the radar as an expert, or whether they are a little more vocal and public with some of their stuff, their knowledge, it doesn't matter. But what you do is you hone in on the person who knows the systems, knows the problem, the person who can contribute, and you understand. You approach them, you have a conversation with them, and you talk to them about, well, I really think you could contribute to this transformation project because you are the expert, you're the SME in this space on this bit of the thing we're trying to change. And if you bring them in, they will be, flattery gets you a long way, but it's just, honest, authentic kind of conversation to say, we need you. Ask for help. Don't assume that everyone thinks you know everything. I don't know everything. I'm still learning. Well, lots of us all, everyone should all still be learning, but seek help, ask for help, and bring the people in. But also check in with them. Do you still have more to give? How is the balance of your day job versus the program if you've been seconded in or you've been drawn in, particularly in charity public sector? It's often an additional layer of tasks and responsibility above and beyond the day job, and that's why you're there, because you're the expert about that bit of the system. So it's making sure that the team understand each other. Make sure that they've got those relationships, that they can be honest, they can be frank with each other, but in a kind of respectful way, and just make sure that they keep as a leader, the main job is to keep the teams working together, but keep them focused on the end game, on the goal, on the outcome that we're trying to achieve. And as long as you do that, the team around you, if they've got the right expertise, if they need a conversation about how to tackle a particular problem, that's a mentoring, development, coaching conversation. But really just picking the people who are the experts, and that may change over the phases of the project. You sort of people come and go, but you've always got your sort of project management program wrapper kind of skill sets, and you bring in the others as you need them as you move along.
Okay. And architecture is a fairly technical role. Everybody I ask on this podcast and every architecture leader I speak to focuses more on the soft skills. What, beyond the technical side, what qualitative assessments do you use to evaluate whether you've got the right team, or whether the team is, genuinely ready for the scale of the transformation program, however big or small it is?
So, I mean, really, it is a qualitative, as you say, assessment of are the people you've got around you, the team you've assembled, ready? Do they understand? Could they go and explain the purpose of the project, the program, to someone else? Now, that might not be a C-suite person it might be somebody of an appropriate level for their level of skill set. Can they explain it to someone else? Because that's a quick check that they understand it and they understand what they're doing, but they can put their interpretation on it. So if you've got, you're going back to the contact center, can they explain why we're changing the CRM system? Can they explain to finance why we're putting a new finance system in, or HR, why have we got a new ERP and HR planning system? Can they explain that? That's a really simple check. Just play it back to them, and you can do that either as the kind of sponsor and lead on the program, or you can go back to their managers, go back to the functional areas they're from, and just ask them to do it kind of in a one-to-one. Just say, play this back. The other way to do it is to encourage them to contribute to the comms and the sort of engagement process around the program. Now, that's not everyone's cup of tea. Quite often there is an alignment of introverts to architecture generally, but if you've got a broad set of people, there'll be a couple of people in that team that you can sort of draw on to say, come with me, help me communicate this, engage with this different group of people. Don't just go back to your own home team and your own functional area. Come out and sort of, whether that's on the corporate kind of intranet pages or part of the stand-ups, or business unit sort of events and stuff like that. Just draw on them, because you never know who is the right person to sort of land a change.
Yeah.
As a senior leader, you're sort of expected to do the job, and it's part of the fabric of the organization and the process, however comfortable or uncomfortable you are with such things. But somebody else might just say it in a different way to you, and I'm always reflecting on, how do I say that? How did someone else present and sort of communicate a change? And those are the two really good things. Do they understand the change, and can they talk to someone else about it at an appropriate level?
And also understanding the recipient of that conversation, because you do have to change the way you articulate things depending on the personality style, the level of the person. What I often find is, the higher up the person within the org structure, the less time they have. So you have to be a bit more direct, a bit more factual, a bit more tangible. Whereas, somebody who's probably going to be more involved in the transformation program probably needs a little bit more detail, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
And then, you've got this iterative, the business is changing, the transformate, we're getting further along, we're 3 months in, 6 months in, 9 months in, 12, whatever it may be. Then the skill set you need at different points could change depending on what the program is. How often do you stop, take check, and reassess? What do we have? Where are we? Where do we need to be? Do we adapt the team, or do we just change? Do we change the people? Do we change the skills of those people? Sorry, the responsibilities of those people? Or do we change how many people are over there and over here, and so on and so forth? How often do you do that?
Yeah, I think, again, borrowing a few more ideas from the agile world approach of things, quarterly is a good round number in my opinion. You can get a fair amount of work done in a quarter, and you can reassess. Am I moving to the next phase? Am I moving from a design phase into an implement? Am I moving from an implement into a launch and a test and train? It's the kind of training and kind of training needs assessment. There's quite a lot you can do in a quarter, and particularly on big, transformation projects. It takes about a quarter to do anything meaningful in most organizations, unless you're very small, very dynamic, or very fast. And with those things, quite often the risk profile goes up as well. So it's kind of always that balancing act. But quarterly, and don't be afraid to do it more often if you need to, would be my advice there.
Okay, fine. And along the way, it's happening more and more now with, I interviewed someone not too long ago, Gerben, and he talks about the complexity crunch, and how we have all this information coming at all angles, different mediums, and people tend to be working harder, not necessarily the outputs, but certainly what they're taking in. So people tend to get worn out quicker than they used to, and talks of burnout, mental health, and so on. What techniques do you use to maintain morale and engagement over that long period of long transformation program, albeit iteratively, and we're breaking it down and so on along the way?
So as you touched on there, absolutely, breaking it down, doing it iteratively does help with that, because you can have a tangible set of goals in a realistic event horizon. You're absolutely right. We're all at information overload as a kind of world. I've drastically reduced my use of social media, because I'm like, it's just, you sit there scrolling, your time evaporates. So it's about focus for me. It's about maintaining focus for short bursts, be that within a day, intraday, or with that's weeks and months for a program. But keeping people engaged, keeping the comms, keeping that drumbeat of engagement and comms going, because the worst thing you can do on a transformation project is go, hurrah, look, we're having a great big kickoff, here it is, we're going to deliver this, and then go absolutely silent for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and come back and go, look, there it is, it's done. And everyone goes, what was that? Because they've moved on, their focus has moved, they've forgotten about this transformation project, and that's not the people on it, because they've been working away hard at it. it's the recipients. If it's an internal transformation, it's often, lots of internal staff are impacted. If it's external, you've probably got a bit more focus on the external customer as you go. But those internal customers, the staff, are always the ones that I'm conscious that we mustn't forget, because they'll be the recipient of this. They've got to use the new CRM system if that's what you're doing. They've got to use the new ERP or HR or finance system or whatever. It's a classic kind of IT technology project of, ta-da, we've delivered you a solution, and here it is, go away and use it, be that. And there's a couple of big examples you can probably well think of. Many people have seen it, but it's about maintaining a drumbeat. And different projects need it monthly, fortnightly, some need it every quarter is enough. But it's just keeping it in the organization consciousness, keeping it there that people know something's happening, celebrating the successes. When you deliver something, or when you reach a milestone, we've finished the design phase, we've now signed with the supplier, we've got this contract. It's keeping those little events going and publicizing them so that everyone knows it is still happening, making sure that the team you've assembled are going back to their functional areas and the impact, because they'll likely come from the areas of high impact, who are communicating back in their team one-to-ones or their team updates that it's still happening. And that keeps it in the organization's conscious and psyche for the time that it needs to be. And then you go, well, okay, now it's phase 2. And you may have a marketing and branding thing that says we change the name of it every so often. I've seen quite a lot of transformation projects change name, but the scope is probably still very familiar.
Fair enough. It's a good skill. We're going to move on to the quick fire questions now. So the first one, and probably most relevant for you, what advice would you give to a newly appointed chief architect? Now that means head of or whatever, leader in architecture.
Get your hands on the org chart. Start with the org chart, work your way around the org chart, and ask questions. Get to know the people, understand their problems and those stakeholders. Whether or not you draw an actual stakeholder map or you just do it mentally, but really, really speak to people, work your way around the org structure, and understand who the stakeholders, influence, and major players are. Because without that, you're going to struggle to achieve very much.
Any advice you wish you received early on in your career?
I'll give you a bit I did actually receive rather than one I wish I received, which was be humble, be really humble, be happy, honest, and admit when you've got something wrong or you've made a mistake but most people will approach that as I've learned something from that. And I think that's a piece of advice. I probably didn't get it as early as I needed it, but it came. It's one that it's stuck with me.
Good one, really good one. What do you think CIOs or CTOs actually care about?
Yeah, that is a good question. If I really knew the answer, then I think you could try asking AI. Perhaps I don't sure it would give you a straightforward answer. If they're there for a long time, and particularly in the sectors I've worked in, they care about outcomes. They care about the customer and the organization. If they are interim, if they're doing a transformational thing, if they're kind of working their way around, they quite often care about delivery and budget. There's always a balance, but those are the sort of key things depending on the style and the role.
Okay, if you had the chance to ask a CTO or a CIO a question and get a genuinely honest answer, not a political one, not what would that question be?
Gosh, aside from what is it you
what
really
do you
want?
actually care about?
No, I think it's when do we know we've done enough? When do we know we've done enough?
Okay, fine. What's the biggest change you expect to see in the market over the next 5 years within architecture, purely from a talent perspective?
I think it'll be a real focus on the human, on the soft skills. Can they? You can go and do the certifications. You can specialize in AWS or Google or Microsoft, or it doesn't really matter. Those can be acquired, but it's the soft skills. It's the build relationships. It's be the trusted advisor, challenge, but also be able to communicate. So it really is looking at moving from technical architecture to people and process, and being at the heart of all of those things, and communicating the change as well. That's not just the responsibility of the business change function or the internal comms and PR person. It's really the role of an enterprise architect, in my view, to really help with that, because you untangle the spaghetti, you remove the ambiguity, you help people with change, because the bit that people fear about change is that ambiguity, and that really is the human side of it.
Okay. Now we started the episode with a question from the previous guest. John, what's your question for our next guest?
So my question for the next guest is, how can enterprise architecture continue to show value to the CXO, to C-suite, in this current climate? You've got rapid consumer product driven sort of boom and bust kind of world that we live in, and architecture is a longer game than that.
Yeah, that is and specifically enterprise architecture as well.
Yeah.
That is a brilliant question. So sadly, John, we've run out of time. So thank you so much for an excellent episode. It's been really interesting and great to chat with you in detail about, humans at the heart of enterprise architecture, which is great. So thanks once again for an excellent podcast episode and for giving us your time today.
Thank you very much.
And that's a wrap on another episode of Transformational Blueprints. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you found plenty of insights and takeaways to fuel your journey. If you enjoyed the episode, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could share it, leave a review, or give us a like. It helps us reach more people in the industry who can benefit from these conversations. Don't forget to follow Synaxia Group on LinkedIn to stay updated on new episodes. The links are in the show notes. Join us next time for more tips, strategies, and stories from some of the brightest minds in technology and transformation. Until then, take care and keep transforming.